Hi everyone, welcome back to Babbling Irons. So it's obviously been well reported. West Ham now have this transfer committee, the committee of four wise kings of West Ham in David Sullivan, David Moyes, Mark Noble, and Tim Steidten. So in principle, it's a great idea in the sense of you have Steidten, who is there purely looking at the long-term objectives and strategy that he wants to put in place at West Ham and bringing players that maybe we haven't looked at previously. From the point of David Moyes, he requires input because he is the manager. He is the one who's ultimately going to pick that first 11. Mark Noble could always be the devil's advocate in the conversation as to, well, if we bring in this player, it maybe creates a blockage or puts a blocker in the way for this player coming through, such as, say, a George Urphy, a Gideon Gadua, etc. And then David Sullivan ultimately is the money man. He is the man that signs the checks and will say yes or no as to whether we sign. And in fairness to Sullivan, there has been players in the past he hasn't liked but has signed off. So he has to be in the conversation. He is the money. He is the bank. He has to be there. But obviously we're going into a window where we have 100 million to spend and potentially more based on what we sell. Now, Sloth, what are your initial thoughts on the Fantastic Four? Do you think I'm going to try and put in as many as I can now? How do you feel the setup is? Do you think it will work in the idealistic way I explained, or do you expect it to be a typical West Ham clusterfuck?
I'm trying not to be too negative. I am really worried about some of what I've heard about certain decisions on players. Obviously, we have covered extensively historical decisions on players who've gone on to be great. Even players like Maddison, I'm not even going to go into depth because it's worrying. But I fingers crossed. I hope that someone like Noble can be the counter between either of them. If someone really isn't a good fit for the club, then he can just say, look, if Moyes is pushing for one player, I don't think that's the right move. And I think when it comes to players judging whether they'd fit in at the club or not, he's probably the man who knows best. Tim, he's undoubtedly got a great track record of signings. Now, Moyes is a very mixed bag of cats. You can't deny it. It's when we look at who we've signed in the past and cash taken away from certain deals to put towards the likes of Jordan Hugill, it is really worrying. So if I was David Sullivan, and thank God I'm not almost, but if I was him,
you've had a lovely holiday with a couple of someone dancing on a boat for you, so you've had a lovely time
coming back to hand. My head would say I'm going to go with Tim Steidten and I'm going to go with Noble. They're going to be my big decision makers. Now, we know all about Moyes' decision making, and he was reportedly very hurt by West Ham fans singing "You don't know what you're doing," and some of the things that happened over the course of the season, the criticisms of him. Now, my opinion on that is that those criticisms were very warranted, and criticism doesn't mean that we don't like the man. It's just, if you perform poorly, particularly in the league, which I don't think anyone can disagree that we did, you deserve critique. So it's really interesting to me that he would look at players, say, for example, like Ward-Prowse, who played in this league for a while, and not set it alight, apart from with set pieces, the only element of his game. And,
I think it was only one open play like I think only if in open play, there's only one assist this season was from open play. Maybe two, which was a cross. But again, it's delivery into the area.
But again, if it's not good enough, like it's just if you're judging a 29-year-old player who has been in the league for a while, been relegated, which I'm the first person to say is not a marker against the player in too negative a fashion. But Mark Hughes didn't rate him. You know, he had a very public falling out with Mark Hughes. And if he's then relegated seasons after, I just think that if you're rating him above Alex Scott, a young prodigy who is very, very highly thought of and has performed against Premier League sides and performed against the champions of the country, you know, and Europe, actually. I've let that one slip. My apologies, Manchester City. I'm really baffled by that. So I do almost think that if we're going to have a committee, then Mark Noble needs to be on it, because he needs to be thinking about this club's future, which, you know, he can be doing with the academy and bringing them through. But I would almost say Moyes isn't going to give these academy players time. It's just not his style. It never has been.
We've seen that, haven't we? You know, people will say, well, look at the number of debuts. The counter argument to completely blow that out of the water is, well, look at the follow-up minutes.
Yeah.
I think Mubama last season made less than 200 minutes of first-team football. This is in a team where we had Scamacca out injured for large swathes of the year, Antonio kicking up a stink for the first half of the season before then he started playing, Danny Ings, who was struggling to have any impact whatsoever. And then we have this young kid who is essentially rampaging in the lower, in the youth leagues. And then when he came on, when he played for us, granted, opposition standard was European, was quite low. But again, very lively, very much what you would class a Moyes striker. Presses from the front, continual work rate, not afraid to put himself around, and yet would not get a sniff. And the only thing you can attribute it to is not his quality, it is his age. So when you look at the names linked with West Ham, Paulinho, James Ward-Prowse, again, player, elder statesman, if you will, if they were to come to West Ham. Well, I actually know there'll be young boys coming into the West Ham team. But again, you know, that these are types of signings that don't represent a club that are looking to the future. It looks more as, again, Prem proven, here and now, and a manager who is purely focusing on, I need to get myself through this season to potentially either earn myself a new contract at West Ham or to go somewhere else. Doesn't seem to be at this point in time. If you look at some of the names brought up, and you can maybe read between the lines on one or two, that there seems to be a much higher preference to the players that are 26 and above. Prem proven again. That it just shows that, again, we're a team purely looking, or we have one perceived direction, which is purely wanting to just get on by again, rather than looking to capitalise on what is about to be an absolute windfall for us.
I think as well, one of the things that we spoke about Mark Noble and how his priority should be getting the best results for the academy players. Now, I'm sorry, but we're in the Europa League. We want to be pushing in the league, and the best results for those academy players is getting them quality loans. You know, if you want to get George Earthy developing and you want to get these players pushing forwards, then get them out on loan into a lower league. Get them constant first team football, because that's where they're going to prove themselves, and that's where you're going to find out whether they're good enough or not. It's not if Moyes is only willing to play Mubama in, say, the Brentford game, which was, you know, a dead rubber, really. Mm-hmm. If he's only willing to play him then, and he's not willing to play him across the whole rest of the season, what message does that send to them? And how can we expect someone like Earthy to develop and get Premier League minutes where we will find out if he's good enough or not? So I think this committee approach for me, I would be, if I was Mark Noble, I'd be thinking, I don't think you've got the best interest of the academy. That's going to be my role. So I'm going to be looking to loan players out, looking to get relationships with those lower league sides who I know are going to, put them in the first team, get them minutes, and be honest with me as well. If they're not performing and they say, look, I just don't think the lad's going to cut it, then, okay, what do you do from then? You either break off the loan and look to move them on, or you say, call up the player, look, the club aren't liking it. You've got maybe a month or you've got the January period. Prove yourself, or else you're going to end up back here and you're going to end up back in the academy games. And we all know you can play there, but I want to see what you're made of. And
yeah, that's an interesting point as well, though, Sloth. Is like we talk about a transfer committee, all we talk about is the inbounds, but they also have to think about what is best for the club in terms of the outbounds as well. So we are seeing the likes of, Pablo Fornals, for instance, linked, Souček linked as going out. So we've not actually seen anything around any of those young, exceptional players that were in the under-18s last season linked with any types of loans. Now, you'd like to think that Steidten will essentially look to utilise his contacts in, say, the Bundesliga and so on to get these players on really good high-level league loans to help them develop. This is something that we've seen the likes of Arsenal deploy for many a year. The likes with Emil Smith-Rowe was out on loan, I think, at 18 to, I think it was Hertha or Hoffenheim, one of the two. Can't quite remember. And then obviously then went to Huddersfield.
Wow.
Yeah. So again, it's, getting players out to a league like the Bundesliga where players are essentially given time to develop because of the structure of the league. Is pretty much, it's Bayern Munich and then the rest, it's teams essentially given that freedom to operate in that way.
Leipzig, sorry, I said Salzburg, didn't I?
Yeah. But again, it's the, as you say, it's important that from a Mark Noble perspective, he is looking as to, well, if I can't convince that these youth players need to be part of the actual team to maybe offset that, well, actually maybe don't need to invest in this position because we've got this young lad who should be maybe given a chance. It's again about, well, how do we get them out? Where do we get them out to? Is really important. And as you say, they are potentially our lifeblood going forward, because if we're not likely to unearth another Declan Rice, we know that. However, there is the chance that you can unearth the next kind of levels down. I think we do have players that are better than the likes of James Tomkins and, Jack Collison, for instance, who are very good kind of players for us. However, I think the current crop are a level above those guys. They could potentially go up into that bracket of when we started to talk about the golden age, because they replicated what they did. They need the minutes to perform. So we need Noble to not only push them into the team, so which then the question is, do you have the manager in which to support that? Because that is a strategy, one way or another. You're transferring between your teams. But also then it's, if the manager's not going to support them, you need to get those out. And when you look at the inbounds, and also we're talking about, we're potentially going to have £100 million windfall to spend. We have a committee of 4. Now, you've already made the point of Steidten should be the man making the decision. He should be, I guess, the decider in the conversation. My personal view is he should be the driver. The rest give input. And then he, given the budget by David Sullivan, then comes to the final decision between the two as to, this is where I think is best to serve our budget. And essentially Noble and Moyes have input, but they are not deciding factors. Noble, I feel, should have a little bit more because, again, he's a sporting director. So he's on the same level as Steidten. But for me, Moyes, with 1 year left in his contract, whilst he picks the team, to me is irresponsible to allow someone with a year left on his deal to have access to £100 million and in which to enforce or to push an agenda for a certain type of player because then we are effectively, if we go on to that kind of process, and I know people are going to say, well, he's the manager, he should decide, which again is acceptable to say that. However, you can't have a manager with a year left to go to be putting a financial burden on the club and to be essentially giving a player a 3-4 year contract, which is going to extend past him. And we are then lumbered with a player who's cost us, say in Paulinho's case, that's maybe £60 million, probably on about 100 grand a week. And that is to play for a manager who, for all we know, could be here only 6 months, not even the full year if he has a bad start. So do you feel that if Moyes is given or allowed that heavy input, we are setting ourselves up for financial problems, essentially, in the future? And not necessarily financial fair play problems, I just mean in the fact that a financial burden and maybe losses, because we may have a manager who does not want these players or do not think they fit his type of style.
Well, I think it won't just be financial problems. It will be a case of, if Paulinho and say James Ward-Prowse are 60 and 30 or even 20 million pounds, that's 80 million pounds. That's 80 million pounds worth of player and our budget gone just on players who, as like Paulinho is a good player. I don't have any disagreements in that. But do I think he's a £60 million player? No, I don't think he's that. I think he's probably half that. But he's worth £60 million to Fulham because, rightly so, he's had a good season for them. But I do think that a lot of West Ham fans are completely ignoring the fact that he's only really an upgrade on Souček. He's not anywhere near the level of a player Declan Rice is, and that's not his fault. It's because he's a different kind of player. He's not going to be the ball carrying dynamo who breaks up play and can then carry it. He can break up the play, but he won't be able to then go on a lung busting run. And
that's what makes it confusing as well when you pair the fact that Ward-Prowse is another one that's looked at. Those two in tandem, neither one of them are ball carriers. Neither of them can drive particularly drive ball. Pace, again, is not something there. They're both very industrious, but their passing is slightly a different end to the scale as well. And James Ward-Prowse actually in open play creates very little, really, in open play, unless he's in a position to kind of cross into the area. Now, we're also potentially looking at maybe Antonio's going. Danny Ings isn't known necessarily for his heading ability, and Scamacca at the moment is also unhappy.
He certainly won't be known for his heading ability after his hair transplant.
Yeah, exactly. He'll have an illustrious mane, just like Rob Holding. But again, it's just that you're buying players for a system and you don't have other players in which to operate within it. And just being industrious is all well and good, but it doesn't win you enough games. We've seen that in the past. We've had industrious teams and we've been relegated because their overall quality wasn't quite there. And we seem to be looking at these players who can, for lack of a better term, run around, put their foot in, but it's then hanging everything on the likes of Paqueta in which to create, and same with Bowen.
I think the thing is that if I was David Sullivan, I would be saying, look, Moyes, I'm going to give you a list of players that you want, like write me up one, and I will see who we can get. If you pick a few that you really think are key, say Harvey Barnes is on there. If you really want Harvey Barnes, I will go out and get you Harvey Barnes. But that means that Paulinho is completely off the table. All these players like James Ward-Prowse off the table now straight away. But he would suit our attack. However, he can also adapt and he can play in a different style. Paulinho and James Ward-Prowse cannot do that. So I would be thinking of these transfers and saying to Moyes, look, Harvey Barnes is Premier League proven, which is fine, but he's also young. So
Youngish.
He takes the priority.
Right.
So therefore, we know he's going to suit our system. We know we could potentially get some profit from him if he performs well, and he will get in with the dynamic of the side. He's also adding to our homegrown quota, whereas, you know, someone like Palhinha, we have the option of signing a player for around that price who is far better, or we have the option of signing players at far less money who offer just as much, if not more.
Yeah, I guess like Djibril Sow is the prime example of far less money. I think it's been rumored now it's actually no longer 20 million euros. It's about an 8 million euro kind of deal, which is around about £5 million. So again, you look in that respect and say, well, that's surely a much better deal because there's not necessarily much difference between them. It's probably one that Moyes could also possibly feel comfortable with because he saw him against us with Frankfurt. And I think, I guess we got to the problem that I have, or the problem that I see, is that we have a manager who struggles to give up control. Again, if we go by kind of what was intimated by Warburton, that, you know, sometimes the coaches' voices are not necessarily listened to when we're talked around maybe changing things. Again, when you can see with potentially these transfers, you know, one of the reasons why he signed his contract at the time was because he had control. Now, they have been largely successful. However, last season we saw a very, very long period in which to embed those players, and it seems to be the only club where really it takes such a long period in which to embed any time of players. And again, having a man who is in a last year of his contract to essentially be the person making decisions on the long-term future of the football club, or at least having such a say in the long-term future, seems almost trying to think of the word really.
Irresponsible.
Yeah, irresponsible is the best way of putting it. It is irresponsible to allow someone who has essentially a short-term view of his future at the club at this current point to do that. If you want him to have that long-term plan, for me, you give him a new contract, and then you say then you now build over this period.
And I think people are quite people get quite vexed by what we mean here, and it's not a case of, you know, we don't think that players over 26 or 27 should even be considered. It's not remotely that. It's just a case of, I don't think it's worth spending a huge amount of our budget on these players when you look at someone like Sow, who is proven in the Europa League, and that's the competition we're going to be in, and is now available for a huge cut price, who we could go in for and would leave us a huge amount of budget left and filling in other areas. So we know that Southampton want Downs. We can use him as that make weight, and we've got players who we know we can use as make weights. But why are we not looking at some of their more exciting players? Livramento, Walker-Peters, you know, Salisu, Lavia, who, look, I know is potentially unrealistic, but we know he left Manchester City for first-team football. He wanted to play every week. So are you really telling me that you think he's going to go to Liverpool just because they're Liverpool over us, who could, let's face it, give him first-team football every week?
And he knows he's good enough to play for one of those teams in the next 2-3 years, especially if he continues to improve.
But he won't play every week. But he definitely won't play every week under Klopp. And look, Klopp's a fantastic manager. I think he's a bellend, but you know, I really like his style of play, and I'm sure he's a lovely guy in person. But he's a bellend in the media and with how he talks to people. So the thing that I would be looking at if I was Lavia is Carvalho's just gone there and he's immediately left. Like the next window, the next summer, he's gone. Now, I know it's only a loan with no option to buy, but I would have been looking at how little minutes he got and thinking, maybe that's not the best deal for me to go there. You know, they're still going to have players like Fabinho. They're still going to have McAllister and a lot of great players coming in potentially, but they can't offer him first team football every single week, whereas we can, you know, and we have a makeshift player. So we have a make weight in that deal to make things happen and to reduce the cost. So if you want Premier League proven, there is the option. And that's almost what I'd be saying to Moyes is like, these are the players from Southampton we can allow you to sign that we can, you know, pretty much guess will make us a profit or won't cost us a huge amount of money, but also they will want to come to us and they will improve our, you know, maybe not necessarily our starting 11, because someone like Salisu, there is that doubt sometimes. You know, he's not always performed. Someone like Bella Kotchap, he would massively improve our squad depth. Does he necessarily improve us over Zuma and Aguerd? No, but he's definitely a step up from Ogbonna. And it's nothing against Ogbonna, but you know, it's factors like that where I just can't believe some of the decision making. And I would hope someone like Noble is going, I just can't be on board with that. You know, if we have players who we can use in terms of the deal, utilize it, because otherwise we're just going to make losses on them.
Yep. I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, we've seen enough players signed and we've made losses. Vlasic is going to be a player we signed, a player we're going to see a huge loss on because he was underutilized. Granted, he may have not pulled up any trees. He may not have been great every time he played. However, he did work hard and he was vastly limited to the point of essentially ostracized away from the team.
He's also played on the wing as well.
And since going to Torino, playing in the centre has been far, far better. So it seems irresponsible to give 100 million or 100 million pounds to be at the mercy of David Moyes, or David Moyes to even have veto, which potentially is true. I doubt it is true. If he has the right to veto, it is an incredibly irresponsible and stupid way to work. I know people will say, well, he is the manager. However, Tim Steidten is the guy that is meant to define and design our long-term future and strategy on the playing field. He is the guy who is going to be responsible, should Moyes leave at the end of the season, to find and replace him. Even if Moyes goes halfway through the season, he's probably going to be the man making the decision along with the board that he needs to go. And again, finding his replacement. So I do kind of think that when you look at it in those terms, Steidten has to be the man above that committee. Essentially, he needs to be the person to kind of wrangle those cats together to come to some sort of consensus and find compromises. Because I think that's the only way it works is finding mini compromises, but also making it very clear that he has a long-term vision and they all need to get on board with it, because that's why he's been brought in, to add more control, because that's apparently why he left Leverkusen. He wants to make more decisions. So you would think him being here is to start to set or to kind of stamp his ground now and to say, this is the route we're going. And this isn't us just having to go at Moyes. You know, it's not that. It's just the fact that you've got to look at it from a completely logical, unemotional point of view, as to you have someone who's there as a manager and you have essentially a middle manager underneath who can potentially undermine you at every turn because they once won Employee of the Month. And essentially, that's what it is. They're going to be sitting there going, I don't think we should do that. And then actually saying, we're not going to do it. In fact, what we need to go get is my old mates or these old guys that have some really old school processes. You know, basically, they all know REST API. We're all using GraphQL. So, but don't worry about that. These guys will learn it. We'll get there. They work hard. That's the main thing. They'll work hard. They'll figure it out in the end. And that's not how good football teams work. And Steidten, when you look at Leverkusen, has gone and got young, industrious, highly technical players. And if he's going to be the man structuring the club beyond next season, he has to be the man making decisions now, because the decisions now in this window impact us not only next season, the following season. So we have to start to look at things, and when we just make decisions on transfers, they have to be not just now, 2 to 3 years ahead. And any transfer we bring in, any transfer we send out, has to be a view as to, we send this player out now on loan, the view is they're back in the team next year. If this player is sold this year, then it's to bring in this player who's going to support us for the next 2-3 years. And I don't think, in all honesty, you can, and this would be any manager, this could be even Pep Guardiola to a point, you cannot have them defining and deciding if they're not going to be there past the next year, all of the players that are coming in, because you have to then start to go, I need to plan for when you go. And if Steinton is defining what West Ham are going to be, what manager we're going to go with, he needs to define as these are the players I want. So when he brings in the manager, he's already got the players that manager is going to utilise and use throughout the course of next season. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys. We're going to wrap it up there. Bit of a long one today, but yeah, please do like, please do subscribe. And one last thing, as ever, Sloth.
Come on, you Irons.